He wasn't broke. He was invisible. 42 years old, nothing saved, drowning in habits he didn't even know were destroying him. Then he changed one daily behavior and his entire financial life flipped. Here's how people at rock bottom reverse money failure. Without earning more money first. It always starts with a small, quiet moment of humiliation. For him, it was a decline card buying groceries. Not for a new TV. Not for a fancy dinner. Just bread, milk, and eggs. The cashier's polite but pitying look was a dagger. He fumbled for another card, praying it would go through. Later that day, an email arrived. Subject: final notice. The rent was late again. He sank into a kitchen chair, the weight of it all crushing him. He pulled out his phone, not to check his bank balance, he couldn't bear to look, but to call his sister. "How did it get this bad?" he asked, his voice cracking. "I make decent money. I'm not supposed to be this person." She listened patiently on the other end, letting him vent his shame and confusion. He talked about his job, his bills, the feeling of running on a hamster wheel that was slowly catching fire. But as he spoke, the real truth started to surface. It wasn't about a sudden job loss or a massive, unexpected expense. His failure wasn't income. It was habits. Tiny, invisible decisions made every single day that had compounded into this catastrophe. Most financial collapse begins long before the money disappears. It starts with the silent erosion of discipline, the small justifications, the slow drift away from responsibility. He knew something had to change, but he didn't know what. The first step, the one that would start to unravel years of failure, was something he'd resisted his entire life. It started with a cheap notebook and a pen. The first habit was the awareness flip. His task was simple: track every single dollar. Not just the big bills like rent and car payments, but every coffee, every vending machine snack, every digital subscription he'd forgotten about. For the first few days, he felt a deep, squirming resistance. Writing down $5.50 for a latte felt embarrassing, even though no one else would see it. Admitting to a 15 lunch delivery when he had food at home felt like a confession of failure. This was the denial phase, the part of his brain fighting to protect the comfortable lies he'd been telling himself. "It's just a few bucks," the old voice whispered, but the notebook didn't lie. By the end of the first week, he stared at the pages, horrified. He saw hundreds of dollars that had vanished into thin air, spent on things he couldn't even remember enjoying. This is the truth about invisible spending. It's not one big leak. It's 1,000 tiny drips. The simple act of writing it down, of making the invisible visible, triggered an immediate change. The next time he went to grab that afternoon coffee, he saw the notebook in his mind's eye. The thought of having to write it down was enough to make him pause. Did he really want it? Or was it just a mindless habit? The psychological effect of awareness is profound. You can't change what you don't measure. For the first time, he wasn't just spending money. He was witnessing himself spend it. And that changed everything. With a clearer picture of where his money was going, he implemented the second habit: paying himself first. Even when he felt completely broke, he set up an automatic transfer, just $5, every single day. From his checking account to a new savings account he labeled future. It felt absurd. What was $5 going to do? A coworker he mentioned it to actually laughed. $5? What are you gonna do? Retire in 1,000 years? The mockery stung, but then, a powerful realization hit him. It wasn't about the amount. It was about who he was becoming. For the first time in his life, he was prioritizing his future self, even before paying for takeout or a new gadget. He was sending a signal to his own brain that his future was more important than his immediate impulses. That $5 a day was a vote for a new identity. He was becoming a saver. He was becoming an investor. Visually, that tiny stream of money started to form a small puddle, then a small pond. It wasn't growing fast, but it was growing. After a few months, he looked at the balance, and for the first time in years, he felt a flicker of hope. He wasn't just surviving, he was building. This habit of paying yourself first, no matter how small the amount, is the foundation of a long-term wealth identity. It shifts you from being a consumer to being an owner. It is the difference between working for your money and having your money start to work for you. But tracking and saving weren't enough. He had to address the root cause of his overspending. This led him to habit number 3, replacing escape with intention. He looked at his spending journal and saw a clear, painful pattern. The cycle was always the same. A stressful day at work led to a feeling of deserving a treat. That treat was usually an expensive meal, an online shopping spree, or a few drinks at a bar. The brief high from the purchase would quickly fade, replaced by a wave of regret when he saw his bank account. This financial guilt created more stress, which in turn fueled the desire for another escape. He was caught in a self-destructive loop. He decided to break the chain. Instead of spending to escape, he would find a different release. He made a list of free or cheap alternatives. When stress hit, instead of pulling out his credit card, he would go for a 10-minute walk. He started journaling his thoughts, getting the anxiety out of his head and onto paper. He found short educational YouTube videos on topics he was curious about. He started calling a friend just to talk. The first few times were hard. The urge to buy something, to get that instant hit of dopamine was powerful, but he stuck with it. Then came a moment after a particularly brutal day at work when he got home, put on his shoes, and went for a long walk by the river. He came back feeling clear-headed and calm. He hadn't bought a single thing to feel better. It was a monumental victory. As he replaced these escape hatches with intentional actions, his debt payoff started to accelerate dramatically. The money he used to spend on impulse was now fire-hosing his credit card bills. He learned the deepest truth of all: financial success is emotional regulation, not math. This journey of small habits culminated in the final flip, the one habit that tied everything together and changed everything. He built a weekly money meeting. Every Sunday morning, for just 15 minutes, he would sit down with his notebook and a single sheet of paper. He'd review his spending for the week, check the progress on his savings, and look at his debt. It wasn't about judgment. It was about steering the ship. During one of these meetings, about 6 months in, he had a powerful conversation with himself. He looked at the numbers, the savings growing, the debt shrinking, and realized he was no longer that person standing humiliated at the grocery store. He was in control. He wasn't failing anymore. This new sense of control began to ripple through his entire life. His confidence at work soared. His relationships improved because he was less stressed and more present. He started sleeping better. He didn't escape failure. He had systematically replaced the habits that caused it. The weekly meeting was the anchor, the system that ensured he would never drift back into the fog of financial invisibility again. It turned a series of good decisions into a permanent lifestyle. His life had been transformed not by a lottery win or a huge raise, but by a few simple, intentional habits stacked on top of each other, week after week. But he was missing one rule, the rule that turns financial survival into true freedom. He didn't learn it until it was almost too late. Watch the next video to see the lesson that even wealthy people get wrong. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.